Hey guys, for today's video, I'll be explaining what Heng Permansor Terrae offers, while comparing him with other sustainers to figure out whether you should build him. And if you do wish to build him, regardless of the answer, I'll also be explaining what vertical investments you should get and why. Starting off with this kit, Heng is going to be a meta shielder that also does meta amounts of sub DPS on par with Hyacine. He's going to be really powerful with Ceridra alongside Fenin or Naxa in dot teams and in follow-up attack teams as well. For his Eidolons, his E1 states that when Heng uses his ultimate, recovers 1 skill point for the team and increases the bondmates' all-type breast pen by 18% for 3 turns, which is really good since this will allow Heng to generate enough skill points in Fenin teams and an insane amount of skill points in Naxa teams, especially if he has an ERR rope and is being ran with 160 plus speed. And then the all-type breast pen is good because typically the characters Heng is paired up with don't provide all-type breast pen, meaning that this debuff is undiluted and thus powerful. Regardless, this Eidolon will typically result in around a 60% increase to his DPS. For his E2, it states that additionally increases the number of ultimate enhancements by 2 times, which is straight up a 200% increase to his sub DPS, since this will allow the Soul Dragon to do twice as many attacks. Also, after Heng uses his ultimate, Soul Dragon's action advances by 100%, which is nice for sustaining because it'll allow you to quickly put up a ton of shield from both the Soul Dragon and the ultimate if you have to. And when the enhanced Soul Dragon takes action, the additional damage dealt by the bondmates is 200% of the original damage, which is another 200% increase to a sub DPS since this damage multiplier increases the original amount, aka the damage done after all the calcs have been said and done, and also a 200% increase to his shields as well. Thus, this Eidolon is yet another really valuable E2 that'll increase his DPS by around 16% as well, and this DPS increase can even be increased by 4% more for every additional Soul Dragon action beyond the standard 4 Soul Dragon actions per cycle. For his E4, it states that the damage taken by the bondmate is reduced by 20%, which is another very mediocre E4, so I would only recommend getting it if you're going for his E6. For his E6, it states that when there is a bondmate on the field, increases the damage received by all allies by 20%, which is really nice since this is practically permanent. Also, the bondmate ignores 12% defense, which, although undiluted, similarly to the all-type breast pen, it's still a really bad amount of defense shred that'll only synergize well with other larger amounts of defense shred, like with Sundays' E1. This is because, to actually make defense shred good, you're gonna want to stack as much defense shred as possible, because the defense shred's damage increase gets increased with the more defense shred that's applied, meaning that at 12% defense shred, you're only increasing the bondmate's DPS by around 8%. But when combined with Sundays' E1, aka 56% more defense shred, the bondmate's DPS will now be increased by around 56%. Another example would be with someone like Silverwolf, because she applies up to 57% defense shred to all enemies. And you can also use her and Heng with Naxa, because Naxa can also ignore 28% more defense shred, which would equate to 97% defense shred, aka 104% more DPS for the bondmates, aka Naxa. It also states that when Heng uses his ultimate, the bondmates would deal additional damage of their corresponding type to all enemies equal to 330% of the bondmates' attack, which is really powerful AoE sub DPS. For his Lightcone, it provides attack percentage, which no other preservation Lightcone does. It also heals the lowest HP having ally, and it provides up to 36% damage dealt to the bondmates, and 24% damage dealt to all other allies. Now, even though this Lightcone on paper would synergize so much more than his other Lightcones, to the point where it would without a doubt be a must-have for Heng, this Lightcone isn't actually that needed for both his DPS and sustaining. This is because for DPS, his Lightcone only increases his DPS by 10%, while his E1 increases his DPS by 16%, and his E2 increases his DPS by 16% as well, with the potential to increase it by 4% more based on how many additional enhanced Soul Dragon actions he can do past the standard 4 per cycle. So So in terms of DPS, his Eidolons are just straight up better. In terms of sustaining, yes, his Lightcone increases his sustaining by 15%, while his E1 only increases his sustaining by, well, 0%, but a sustaining increase of this degree isn't as valuable as a 6% DPS increase and a free skill point per ultimate use, so his E1 is still better than his Lightcone. Now if his Lightcone increased his sustaining by around, I don't know, 100%, like how his E2 does, then it'd be better than his E1, but because it doesn't, for my investment recommendations, I would recommend going for his E1, then his E2, and then his S1. I would back this recommendation up even more if you're going for the Journey Lightcone at Superimposition 5. This is because this Lightcone at Superimposition 5 is only 5% worse than his signature when it comes to sustaining and 7% worse when it comes to his DPS, meaning that for an alternative, although costly, it's not too much worse. But at Superimposition 1, the Journey Lightcone is 16% worse than his signature when it comes to sustaining and 9% worse when it comes to his DPS. So at that point, I'd recommend using a high base attack Lightcone since they'd only be 1% worse than the Journey Lightcone for both sustaining and DPS. For his teams, like I've stated prior, he'll synergize really well with characters that have a lot of attack, like dot characters, and characters that synergize with supports that provide a ton of attack, like Feinen and Anaxa with Ceridra. He'll also synergize really well with follow-up attack characters because the enhanced Soul Dragon attack Dan Heng gets after using his ultimate is considered as a follow-up attack. For dot characters, considering that you'll typically be running both Kafka and Hyacine since they both play an integral role at making dot actually usable, this means that you'll have two really good characters that can benefit from being designated as the bondmates. If you designate Kafka as the bondmates, well then you get more shields and more ultimate for Dan Heng since she'll typically be built with hyperspeed, which is really good for his energy regeneration and Soul Dragon's advance forwards. But if you designate Hyacine as the bondmates, Hyacine will benefit a lot more from Dan Heng's attack boost, considering that she's the main DPS. So whether you want to designate Kafka or Hyacine as the bondmates can be up to what your specific team needs. But typically, you'll want to designate Hyacine as the bondmates, since the attack boost from Dan Heng given to Hyacine will typically outperform better than the shields and ultimates that Kafka's speed can provide for Dan Heng. Also, if you're going to use Dan Heng in dot teams, you're better off replacing his high base attack Lightcone with Japart's signature Lightcone, and filling his relics up with some effect hit rates so that Kafka can give him a 100% attack buff when he has a 75% effect hit rate. For Feinen, Dan Heng will be able to provide Feinen with even more attack and one core flame every time he gives Feinen a shield. Not only that, but Feinen's departed state increases his attack by a massive amount, and so does Ceridra, which will result in the Soul Dragon dealing a lot more additional damage with Feinen and Ceridra than it would with other characters. Now, because Feinen doesn't allow other allies to do actions in his departed states, this means that Dan Heng won't be able to do enough actions to recharge enough energy for his ultimate once Feinen leaves his departed states. So if you're going to use Dan Heng with Feinen, you're better off using an ERR rope rather than an attack percentage rope. For Anaxa, Dan Heng will be able to generate a ton of energy and do a lot more sub DPS damage every time Anaxa does his multiple skills, since every time the bondmate does an action, Dan Heng gains 6 energy and his Soul Dragon is advanced forward by 15%. And if Anaxa is being ran with Ceridra, well then Dan Heng's sub DPS will benefit from the massive attack increase Ceridra provides to Anaxa, and Dan Heng will be able to gain more energy and Soul Dragon actions since Ceridra allows Anaxa to do even more actions. For Feixiao, Dan Heng is going to be really good with her, because Feixiao's follow-up attacks count as actions that can advance Dan Heng's Soul Dragon forward by 15% and provide him with 6 energy. Not only that, but because Dan Heng's enhanced Soul Dragon's actions counts as follow-up attacks, he can consistently generate stacks for Feixiao's ultimate. Okay, so now that we've gone over all of this information, how much value does Dan Heng have compared to other sustainers like Aventurine or Hyacine? Well, compared to Aventurine, Dan Heng is literally just Aventurine Pro Max. Since Dan Heng has better sub DPS, better shields, he has follow-up attacks depending on how many enemies are on the field, he has better synergy with Anaxa Anaxa and Feinin, who are two of the best main DPS in the game. He has better synergy with Sunday, who is the best single target supports, and he has better synergy with Ceridra, who is a niche support, but she's really synergistic with 2, and now with Dan Heng, 3 meta characters. Now, Aventurine could arguably be better in an Acheron team because his ultimate implants a weakness, and because the trend in Lightcone, aka the Lightcone that lets preservation characters implant debuffs, is better with Aventurine than it is with Dan Heng, because the trend Lightcone increases defense, not attack, like how Dan Heng wants it to. But even then, Dan Heng's better sub DPS and sustaining still makes him a very strong sustaining option for an Acheron team. Now, for a Feixiao team, Dan Heng is typically the better option because Feixiao's follow-up attacks have much more synergy with Dan Heng than with Aventurine, and because, unlike with Acheron, Aventurine's debuffs don't matter with Feixiao. Thus, not only is Dan Heng better because his sub DPS and sustaining is better, but he's also better because he synergizes more with Feixiao's follow-up attacks that provide him with 6 energy and advances Soul Dragon forward by 15%. But again, if you're facing off against enemies that attack multiple times, like against Hule, Aventurine will typically be better in a Feixiao team because you'll be able to do more follow-up attacks. Now, compared to Hyacine, Dan Heng's sustaining capabilities and sub DPS are on par with her. You see, Hyacine has much more synergy and is thus better in HP scaling teams, and Dan Heng has much more synergy and is thus better in attack scaling teams. So, if your Hyacine is already being used in your Castris, Evernight, or Mid-A team, then you can just slot Dan Heng into your Feinin, Anaxa, or Feixiao team and do just fine. Now, considering that Dan Heng is going to be the free unit, whether you should summon on him really just means if you should vertically invest into him. He's going to be really powerful with Ceridra alongside Feinin or Anaxa, and in dot teams. Not only that, but his sustaining and sub DPS is on par with Hyacine's sustaining and sub DPS, meaning that you can practically slot him into any team and outperform the majority of other sustainers, as long as that team isn't an HP scaling team. And what's so great about all of this is that he does all of this at E0 S0, and his feasible vertical investment options, aka E2 S1, only provide him with around a 45% to 53% increase to his DPS, which is pretty normal, but it's not anything insane like the Herda's E2, which increases her DPS by 63%. Thus, I wouldn't recommend vertically investing into him solely for a sub DPS increase, but considering that Aventurine has managed to stay viable even after a year of his release, I would recommend investing into Dan Heng PT for a sustaining boost if you already have good characters like Lightcones and Eidolons, since at E2S1, his sustaining increases by 124%, which is definitely a good enough sustaining boost for at least 1 or 2 more years. Now, whether you should build him isn't even a question. Although we have plenty of good sustainers, Dan Heng PT is such a crucial component for a lot of meta teams that it'd be a waste not to build him. Anyways, that's all I've got for today. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you have anything you wish to say, feel free to leave it down in the comments below. I'd greatly appreciate it. Goodbye.